Night with the ITV News at 10.
"52 years for the teenager who brought horror to Southport. Alice De Silva Aguiar, BB King, Elsie Stancombe, all murdered, 10 others injured, lives changed forever. Axel Rudakubana, now 18, took a taxi to go on a murderous rampage in a dance class full of innocents.
I'm sure that Rudakubana had a settled and determined intention to carry out these offences, and that had he been able to, he would have killed each and every child, all 26 of them.
The judge said Rudakubana will likely never be let out of jail, 6 months since what the PM described tonight as one of the most harrowing moments in our country's history. Also on News at 10 tonight. Lives shattered, the families and child victims have their say in court on the legacy of pain they suffer. Why was he never stopped? A troubled child obsessed with violence, known to the authorities for years.
If there is a suspicion of danger from an individual, all those authorities should talk to one another as a matter of urgent necessity. We need to find out whether they did.
How disinformation ran riot, big questions too over why the full picture about Rudakubana appeared slow to emerge. And in other news, a red storm warning for Scotland and Northern Ireland as millions receive alerts with 100-mile-an-hour winds expected.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham in Southport.
Good evening from Southport, a town that thought it could be shocked no more after the fatal stabbings of 3 little girls last July. And yet today, as their teenage killer, Axel Rudakubana, was sent to jail for at least 52 years, people here have been horrified all over again by terrible new details of the attack. The judge said he believed Rudakubana would have killed all 26 children at the Taylor Swift dance workshop if he could, and told him he was likely to die in prison. Had Rudakubana not pleaded guilty at the last minute on Monday, accounts of his crimes would have emerged bit by bit during his trial. Instead, they've been made public in one fell swoop. For tonight's programme, we've judged some of the details too distressing to broadcast. The families had also made clear they did not want them reported. Rudakubana did inflict one final agony on them, though, as the families waited for his sentencing. He delayed proceedings by disrupting them enough for the judge to order him out.
He is chillingly calm, considering what he is about to do. This is Axel Rudakubana in the back of a taxi.
Number 34A, yeah.
Asking for directions to the dance class he'd chosen as his target.
Are we cash your card, mate?
Moments later, he's filmed trying to enter, at first by the wrong door, before eventually disappearing upstairs. Within minutes, he'd stabbed 9-year-old Alice, 6-year-old BB and 7-year-old Elsie multiple times, along with 8 other girls and 2 adults. He had no clear motive, police say, except violence for its own sake.
He had a long-standing obsession with violence, killing and genocide. His only purpose was to kill, and he targeted the youngest, most vulnerable in order to spread the greatest level of fear and outrage.
He arrived at court to face punishment for that atrocity last July. But as the hearing began, he disrupted the proceedings. The judge told he hasn't been eating for days. He started shouting from the dock that he felt ill and needed to see a paramedic, despite having been checked and deemed fit. Alice's father shouted, "Coward," as the judge ordered him to be removed. And so he wasn't in court as details of the horror he inflicted was heard. How he'd systematically gone round the room with his knife. Children who ran were chased down, one who escaped pulled back inside, and he didn't hear the impact statements from his victims. Alice's parents said, "Our dream girl has been taken away in such a horrible, undeserving way that it shattered our souls. Living life without Alice is not living at all. Elsie's mum said, "He took our daughter, her life, her future, and everything she could have been. There is no greater loss and no greater pain." More upsetting still for those families, the revelation Rudakabana had gloated to police about their deaths.
He stated that he was happy. He was happy that some of those children had died. It was completely distasteful. It's something that shocked us as an investigation team.
What does it say, do you think, about him?
It shows that he's absolutely no remorse. He doesn't care what he's done.
The knife he used that day was identical to this one, bought online a fortnight earlier, despite him being under 18. When police searched his home, they found an array of weapons, an Al-Qaeda training manual which included how to kill with knives, and under his bed, a tub containing the toxic substance ricin. It hadn't been used, but 0.5 milligram is enough to kill an adult. He chose not to come back to court to hear the judge sentence him to at least 52 years in prison.
In my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation, he will serve almost the whole of his life in custody. I consider at this time that it is likely he will never be released and that he will be in custody for all his life.
For the families of the victims, how long he will serve is just the first of so many questions that need answers about that dreadful day. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Liverpool Crown Court.
Well, as we heard in Ben's report, families of the murdered girls submitted impact statements to the court detailing their loss. They're so moving, we thought it worth reporting them at some length. Survivors did the same, and they are just as moving and shocking. The parents of Alice de Silva Aguiar said their daughter Alice was a very kind girl who valued equality and fairness at the core. A world of possibilities awaited her. Our life went with her. She took us too. 6 months of continuous pain and a lifetime sentence. That's what we got then and the life we live now. Elsie Stancombe's mother, Jenny Stancombe, said the family had lost their best friend through an act of pure evil. About Axel Rudakabana, she said, "Though you have stolen our daughter from us, you will not take away our determination to honour her memory. We will carry her love, positivity and her legacy forward, no matter how much pain you have caused." The class instructor, Leanne Lucas, read her own statement to the court. She said, "I cannot give myself compassion or accept praise, as how can I live knowing I survived when children died? The impact this has had on me can be summed up by one word: trauma. For Alice, Elsie, Bibi, Heidi and the surviving girls, I'm surviving for you." While a 14-year-old girl who also survived said about Rudakabana, "I want you to know that you changed our lives forever, but whilst you live behind bars alone, I will make sure that our family will do our best to move forward with our lives." Well, let's go back now to Ben in Liverpool. Ben, you were in court as those impact statements were read out. What was your impression of what you heard?
Well, I think the most striking thing today really was the contrast between the dignity of those survivors and their families and the utter contempt they were shown by Axel Rudakabana. A 14-year-old girl had the courage to outline in open court the trauma that he'd inflicted on her while he cowered in the cells below. This was, by any standards, an utterly harrowing day for everybody in court. We listened to the screams of young children on CCTV as they fled the building. There were agonised gasps in the courtroom as we watched some of them collapse in the street from the awful injuries that he had inflicted. The judge came as close as judges can today to outright calling Axel Rudakabana evil, and he made clear that if he'd carried out these attacks just 9 days later, after his 18th birthday, he would have received a whole life order. And yet he goes to prison, having still not answered the question we've been asking since the night this happened, Julie. Why, how could anybody inflict such extreme violence on such young, innocent girls?
Indeed, Ben, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, for the people of Southport, the loss of life was followed by a loss in confidence in the state and its agencies. So many of them knew about Rudy Kobana, but didn't collaborate sufficiently to stop him.
Obsessed with extreme violence, Rudy Kobana spent hours watching horrific content online. How did this seemingly ordinary schoolboy become a mass murderer? The teenager was well known to the authorities. He'd attacked before, but the red flags over his behaviour were repeatedly missed.
The perpetrator had contact with a range of services, including the counter-terrorism Prevent system.
In fact, he was referred 3 times to Prevent from the age of 13 for viewing violent material on school computers, and 3 times his case wasn't escalated because he didn't fit the definition of a would-be extremist.
The absence of evidence of a motivation means that these acts have not met the legal definition of terrorism. But to be clear, that does not make the horrendous acts any less terrifying or terrorising.
Prevent failed to deal with him properly, but all the warning signs were there. In 2019, he was expelled after admitting taking a knife to school more than 10 times. He came back here 2 months later, using a hockey stick as a weapon to attack other children. Police later found a knife in his bag, and when asked why he was carrying it, his chilling response was to use it. He was later convicted for that incident in the youth courts, and in the years that followed, police were called to his home in Banks in Lancashire 5 times, including for hitting his father and carrying a knife on a bus. He was never arrested for those crimes. He later attended a specialist school after being diagnosed with autism, but staff called police after he was absent for nearly a year. There were repeated referrals to safeguarding services, but only ever limited intervention, and he stopped engaging with those services. There are now concerns that vital information was not shared effectively.
It is an absolute requirement that if there is a suspicion of danger from an individual, all those authorities should talk to one another as a matter of urgent necessity. We need to find out whether they did. I doubt it.
Just days before the murders, the teenager was seen trying to get a taxi to the school he'd been excluded from. His father stopped him, but his movements and even the clothes he was wearing are chillingly similar to the day of the attacks. And we may never know why Rudy Kobana brought horror to Southport that day. Sarah Corker, News at 10.
Well, the Southport murders highlighted a conflict over how much information about a mass murder suspect like Rudy Kobana should be made public. The law says nothing should be put out there that could affect the result of any future trial. But as we saw on the day of his attack, a vacuum of facts led to people making up their own versions. The Chief Constable here on Merseyside told us she would have liked to have been able to counter such disinformation.
It was the night that social media created anti-social madness on the streets of Southport. They hurled bricks and fireworks, fuelled by accusations thrown online. Police in riot gear left trying to contain violence that even they feel now could have been countered in other ways.
I felt in the events following the 29th of July that I wanted to be able to say more around the misinformation and disinformation. There's a real need to look at this criminal justice process, and as we know, the Law Commission have already started that piece of work around looking at the contempt of court legislation.
Under the Contempt of Court Act 1981, you're not allowed to say or write anything publicly that could prejudice a trial. On paper, that rule applies from the moment a suspect is arrested, though in practice the risk is seen as much greater once they've been charged. For example, we were able to broadcast this CCTV of Axel Rudikabana after he was arrested, but before he'd been charged, and to debunk the myth that he was an asylum seeker or a Muslim. But as rioters began feeding off their false theories in other towns and cities, the question is whether authorities should have told us more. Southport looks almost nothing like it did when I was last here on the night of that riot. That is mostly due to the determination of this community to heal any divisions that others had tried to create. But the weapons of the far right that night weren't just fire and bricks, they were disinformation. And there is a fierce debate now about how to disarm them in future. Because too much information can pose its own dangers.
I saw Joanna Yates that evening, no.
In 2010, Christopher Jeffries was arrested over the death of Joanna Yates. It turned out he was innocent, but hardly treated as such in the days after his name was made public. In recent years, the law has begun to prioritise the privacy of suspects.
We're blaming those who are protecting and upholding the rule of law for unlawful and criminal rioting and public disorder that we saw on our streets. We all know who's to blame for that. It's the people who did it themselves, the perpetrators. And I think we should think long and hard before upending a system that is there to serve the interests of justice.
For now, the government's priority is to crack down on social media speculation. After all, both murder and mayhem in Southport were driven by warped content online.
Well, Paul joins me now. And Paul, today's sentencing is clearly a punctuation point in the terrible suffering here in Southport, but we still have that public inquiry looming. What are the most serious legal questions that need to be addressed in your view?
Well, I think there are potentially several ways in which the laws could change following the Southport attacks. Not just this question of what we should know about suspects when they're arrested, although that is one of the most heavily politicised issues. Tonight there have been claims this week, haven't there, of a cover-up. The government says that is quite frankly ridiculous, but that rumbles on. There is also this question of whether the law should change to alter the definition of terrorism. We've heard some of that from Sarah's report this evening, this issue about the fact there was no clear motivation with Rudikabana. The Prime Minister suggested earlier in the week he would like the definition to be broadened to include what he calls loners and misfits. Rudikabana would certainly fit into that category, and that is an ongoing review now. There will also be questions, as ever, about knife crime, the access of knives online, the access of all sorts of harmful material online. Rudikabana is of the internet age. He grew up where you could search for pretty much anything on Google and see it. Again, there are calls to crack down on that. The one thing the law isn't going to be able to answer tonight, though, is why did he do it? Only he has the answer to that. Only he knows how he was able to overcome the most basic of human instincts, not to hurt a child when they're crying out in distress, not to be that deranged, not to be that evil. He may never give up the answer to that. It may be the one piece of power that he continues to wield over the victims as he now serves at least 52 years in prison.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Well, let's look at some other news now. And here on the northwest coast, as across the rest of northern and western Britain, potentially deadly winds are on the way. People directly in the path of Storm Awan have had emergency alerts on their phones. The winds are going to be so strong that lives could be lost, hence rare red warnings in place in Northern Ireland and southwest and central Scotland. No wonder schools in those places have closed. There are also amber warnings in northern Scotland and northern England and yellow in southern Britain.
Red weather warnings like this are rare. And Storm Awan brings a double danger, because not only do we have a forecast of 100 miles per hour winds, it is due to batter the most densely populated parts of Scotland. In Glasgow's train and bus stations today, there were people trying to leave while they still could.
Yeah, we're heading home today. Yeah, we don't want to take the risk.
It's a bit of a pain because I stay in the Isle of Bute, so I'm not getting home until Sunday. At the earliest, I may have to miss a funeral.
Well, a bit concerned because, my daughter's getting an appointment for the hospital tomorrow.
The forecast tomorrow is for wind speeds not seen in the UK for over a decade. And that same weather system that will tomorrow deliver Storm Awan sent this ahead of time today. What's being called a rare mini tornado landed on the shores of Cornwall, It whipped up a fair amount of debris and left some destruction in its wake. But even this pales in comparison to what Awan has the potential to do tomorrow. Police in Scotland are taking the unusual step of issuing a stay-at-home advisory.
Keeping the public safe, and part of that is this message around asking people just to stay at home during the period of the red weather warning.
Just don't risk it. Don't think about popping out to the shops.
Absolutely.
By 10 a.m, Storm Awan hit Scotland hard. More than half the population will be inside the red zone for the weather warning. Cancellations are expected on Calmac and Northlink ferries servicing the island communities. Airports, including Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen, are already announcing cancellations. And all trains in Scotland will be cancelled, with most services north of Preston also suspended due to an amber weather warning in place for the north of England. We're recording this at 6 o'clock, and about 4.5 million phones in Scotland and Northern Ireland are currently receiving this emergency alert from the UK government. The red weather warning and the risk to life is being taken seriously. Builders told us their sites have to be secured, and some nurseries already closed early today. These pupils had just been told they'll have no school tomorrow.
The whole class went crazy because none of my class likes school, but I like school.
Myself and my husband has to take a work from home option tomorrow.
How are you feeling about that?
That's a last minute decision, so a little bit difficult.
Storm Awan doesn't hit until tomorrow morning, but the disruption is already here. A nation now bracing itself. Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
Well, Chloe is in Londonderry across the Irish Sea from here tonight. What's the situation there then, Chloe, as the storm approaches?
Well, Julie, it's almost eerily still and quiet here this evening, perhaps because people are heeding that advice to stay indoors. Northern Ireland is expecting to wake up to winds of 80, 90, possibly even 100 miles an hour tomorrow in some coastal areas. All bus and train services, all public transport across Northern Ireland has been cancelled. All schools have been advised to close, and people have been told to keep off the roads because of the risk of falling trees and flying objects. That emergency alert you heard about in Peter's report, we got that here too. Our phones lit up as we came across the border, and I think that gives you a sense of the level of concern about this storm. It is only the 5th time ever that system has been deployed, and it's also the biggest real-life test of it to date so far. So I think the threat of this storm is being taken very seriously here. The advice is do not underestimate it and stay indoors if you possibly can.
Chloe, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, to the Middle East now, where attacks by Israeli settlers on Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are on the increase. The ceasefire in the other Palestinian territory, Gaza, is holding. But Donald Trump, taking over the American presidency with his pro-Israeli views, has emboldened the settlers in their illegal home building.
Their faces are covered, but there's no disguising their intent. Young men from Jewish settlements wrecking anything they can. If the ceasefire has brought relative calm to Gaza, not far away in the occupied West Bank, their fellow Palestinians are again under attack.
I had mattresses, I had a bed, everything was burned.
Nael's farmland is also becoming unreachable.
And now some of them came from there, some probably from here.
New outposts of scattered caravans, illegal even under Israeli law, keep springing up. And this is what Nael's CCTV captured unfolding here, even as Israel and Hamas began exchanging their first hostages and prisoners.
You can see how close the Israeli outposts and settlements are. In all, the UN says 5 different Palestinian villages in this area came under attack, meaning that people who should have been celebrating the release of 90 detainees from Israel's prisons, the vast majority of them women and children, instead spent the night dealing with their properties and cars being set on fire. What happens if you try and go there now?
Now, they just shoot me.
25 miles away across the West Bank, Sandra's seen her home grow and grow.
So this town now stretches over 5 different hilltops.
Yes. Like every Jewish settlement here, it's illegal, according to the UN's highest court. She's unrepentant, but uneasy about the increasing violence.
Anybody who attacks unwarranted
attacks of a Palestinian or anybody in any way is terrible. They must be brought to justice.
One of the first things President Trump did was to cancel sanctions against Israelis accused of violence against Palestinians. Surely overturning a policy designed to discourage violence by settlers is simply going to say to people that it's okay.
Here we have a situation of people who have not been accused of any crime, or those who were accused of a crime but are being processed through the Israeli judicial system. What right does a foreign country have to get involved?
But although it wasn't part of the ceasefire, Israel's far-right government has just released settlers it was holding.
Can you show me your head now?
It leaves West Bank families like Mashur's struggling for justice. The 16-year-old needed 4 hours of surgery last week after being hit by a rock. The Israeli settlers who attacked his village captured on camera.
I thought on the spot that I was going to lose my son.
While they can clean up the wreckage here, it's the dread of what's next that's hardest to live with. Rachel Younger, News at 10 in the occupied West Bank.
Well, half a world away from here, in the fire-hit city of Los Angeles, the delayed build-up to this season's Oscars got underway with the nominations. There was a record 13 for a foreign film for Emilia Perez, the musical crime thriller about a transgender drugs lord. Its star, Carla Sofia Gascon, is the first openly trans actor to get an Oscar nomination. Ralph Fiennes made the shortlist in the Best Actor category in Conclave, and fellow Brit Cynthia Erivo is in the Best Actress category in the film version of the musical Wicked.
Even as the Oscars bosses were making their way to the stage for today's nominations, new wildfires were burning north of LA. Thousands more people under evacuation orders. In the midst of this crisis, assurances that this year's Oscars will reflect the terrible loss.
We will honor the talented filmmakers nominated today, pay tribute to our brave first responders, and celebrate the enduring spirit of Los Angeles and the film industry.
Voters were clearly looking for something different. So the Spanish-language musical Emilia Perez, about a Mexican drug lord, leads the nominations at 13 and has made history. No other foreign language film has had more Oscar nominations. And its lead, Carla Sofia Gascon, has become the first trans woman to be nominated for Best Actress.
Hello, this is Donald Trump.
With President Trump recently taking aim at gender ideology, and today's acting nomination for Sebastian Stan, who plays a young Donald Trump in The Apprentice, this could make for a very political Oscars, particularly as Trump tried to stop the release of the film.
This is a conclave, Aldo. It's not a war.
It is a war.
The thriller Conclave, based on the best-selling novel by Robert Harris, leads British hopes with 8 nods, including one for Ralph Fiennes, chasing his first Oscar, and one for its screenwriter.
I love Robert's book, and then I love the people that were involved in making the film. So it was just a really happy experience for me from the beginning. So this feels, I feel almost spoilt that we should be being rewarded at this end of it as well.
It's the wizard who should be afraid of me.
And watch out for Cynthia Erivo. The British actress has one of 10 nominations for Wicked. There are also nods for more homegrown talent for makeup and production design on the box office smash.
I attended university in England.
There are 10 nods too for The Brutalist, with Brit Felicity Jones getting her second Oscar nomination.
More beautiful.
And what a year Demi Moore is having, with her first Oscar nomination. In a statement today, she said she was humbled, but added, this is a time of incredible contrasts. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
Finally tonight, it was at the height of last summer, just under half a year ago, when everything changed in this gentle seaside resort. We were here that terrible night. Tonight, in the dark and cold of midwinter, it isn't just a different season that has made Southport a different place. Axel Rudikabana's 15-minute maelstrom of evil traumatised this town, snatched away 3 innocent lives and left many more fearful ever since at every turn. And what could have been more innocent than little girls spending their school holiday dancing to the music of their idol? The intense shock here was soon repurposed as sympathy for their families, building unity and community, a coming together that could yet be the legacy of those 3 little girls, Alice, Elsie and Bibi. From Southport, from all of us, good night.
I love my bit.